Welcome to This Feels Familiar. I'm your host, Minaa B. I'm a therapist, author, and creator of the Siblinghood Theory, and this show explores the themes of belonging, conflict, and relational patterns shaping your life. Let's dive in. As a therapist, I am constantly working with clients who come to me to learn how to manage the relationships they have with other people in their life. It could be relationships with their mother or their father. A lot of the time, it's relationships with their siblings. And sometimes it's even with their friends or their partner. And there's a question I constantly hear in these sessions. What else can I do to make this relationship work? The person asking has already tried everything. They've had the hard conversations. They've set boundaries. They've explained how the behaviors hurt them. They've given second chances, third, and even 10th chances. They've adjusted their expectations. They've worked on themselves. They've been patient and they've also been understanding. And the other person, whether it be the partner, friend, sibling, mother, hasn't changed. The pattern keeps repeating. The hurt keeps happening. The promises to do better don't translate into actual change. But the person sitting across from me is still asking, what else can I do? And here's what I often have to say. You've done enough. The question isn't what else can you do to change them? The question is, can you make peace with this relationship being what it is instead of what you wish it could be? Because here is a truth that I think a lot of people not only have a hard time accepting, they have a hard time acknowledging this. And that is, not everyone wants to heal. Not everyone wants to change. Some people don't want to do better. They want you to accommodate their behavior. And at some point, you have to decide whether you're willing to keep accommodating bad behavior, harmful behavior, hurtful behavior, or whether it's time to grieve the relationship you wanted and accept the one you actually have. So before we dive in, please take a moment to subscribe to this show so that you don't miss any episodes moving forward. So I want to start here. What are some signs that you actually have done enough? How do you know? How do you know when it's time to stop trying to fix the relationship and start grieving what it will never be, or decide if you want to continue to be in that relationship? Here are some signs. The first thing is you've named the pattern multiple times and nothing changes. So you've had the conversations, not once, many times. You've clearly explained what's hurting you, what needs to change, what you need from them, and you've been very specific. You haven't been vague or passive aggressive. You've done the work your therapist told you, such as you used I statements and you've been calm and direct. And they heard you. They heard you loud and clear. They might have even apologized. They might have said they'll do better, but the behavior doesn't change. The same pattern keeps showing up. The same hurt keeps happening. When you've named a pattern clearly multiple times and the other person continues the behavior, they're showing you who they are, but most importantly, they're showing you what they want to do. The next thing is they acknowledge the hurt, but don't change the behavior. And this is particularly painful, but also confusing. So they'll say, I know I hurt you. I'm sorry. I'll work on it. And they present to seem as genuinely remorseful in the moment, but then they go and do the same thing again and again. They're sorry for hurting you, but they're not willing to do the work to stop hurting you. The apology becomes a way to reset the cycle without actually changing the pattern. When somebody repeatedly acknowledges harm but continues causing it, they're in some ways letting you know that they're not ready to change the behavior. And maybe they are okay with what they're doing. And the apology really is a way for you to just get back on their good side, to not be mad at them anymore. What they want to do is relieve the tension that's happening in the moment, but they may not be committed to actually changing the behavior long term. Another common issue I see is you're doing all the emotional labor. You're the one initiating difficult conversations. You're the one suggesting the solutions. You're the one researching how to communicate better, how to set boundaries, how to repair relationships. You're the one reading all the books, listening to podcasts. You're even the only person going to therapy, or you're finding a therapist for that person because they don't even want to do the work of finding a therapist for themselves, despite knowing that the relationship is fractured. They're doing nothing. They're not putting in any effort. They're not self-reflecting. They're not taking responsibility. They're waiting for you to figure it out, to accommodate them, to adjust yourself to make the relationship function. When one person is doing all the work to save a relationship, the relationship isn't being saved, it is being carried. And you can't carry someone who won't walk alongside you. The next thing is your needs are treated as unreasonable. You ask for very basic things, which could be more honesty in a relationship because the person has a pattern of lying. Maybe more respect because there are certain behaviors they engage in that feels humiliating, or behaviors where they're dismissing your needs, ignoring your needs, or even minimizing them. And as a result of that, you're asking for consideration. They're inconsistent, so you're asking for follow through. And maybe you're being told you're asking for too much. You're too sensitive. You're too demanding. You expect too much. You need to be more understanding. Your reasonable needs are reframed as character flaws, and you actually start to believe it, which is why you go to therapy to say, I need to fix this part of myself so that my needs can be met, instead of recognizing it's possible that the needs that you have are quite normal, but the person that you're asking to meet those needs for you, they don't want to, or they're just not capable of doing it. And so I want you to understand that basic decency, respect, and care are not too much to ask for. If someone treats your needs as unreasonable, they're telling you that they're not willing to meet you where you are. They're not willing to give you the thing they're asking for, or maybe they're also just not capable or equipped, and they may have no desire to become equipped to give you what you want. The last thing is they want you to accommodate their behavior, not change it. And this is a core issue I see, especially in familial relationships. When someone comes to me to tell me about their sister or their brother or their mother, they don't want to heal. They don't want to grow. They don't want to do better. They want you to accept their behavior as it is. And sometimes they say it to you plainly. They want you to stop bringing up the issue. They want you to tolerate the hurt. They want you to adjust your boundaries to accommodate their patterns. And they're asking you to change yourself to make space for the behaviors that harmed you. And when you can see this, when you realize that they're not asking, well, how can I be better? But instead saying, how can you accept me as I am? That's when you know. That's when you know you've done enough. So I want to take a moment to unpack why we keep trying. Why do we keep asking ourselves or our therapist, what else can I do, even when we've already done more than enough? Here are some things that I see in the line of work that I do as a therapist. One is hope. There's this hope that this will be different this time. We hold on to hope. We think maybe if I say it differently, they'll change. Maybe if I'm more patient, they'll change. Maybe if I give them more time, even though I've given them 5 years, even though they've been this way since I was a child, maybe this time they'll finally hear me and change. Hope is such a powerful tool. It keeps us trying when logic tells us to stop. But hope without evidence becomes denial. And when you're hoping for change that never comes, you're not being hopeful, you're avoiding acceptance. Research also actually shows that people who have extremely high levels of empathy are actually at risk of being manipulated, because I find that hope and empathy can sometimes go hand in hand too. where we say, well, I have empathy for X. Therefore, I'm hoping that by them understanding how their past childhood trauma, their unresolved past childhood trauma, is impacting our romantic relationship, I'm hoping that with this awareness now, they'll get better. But I also have empathy for the fact that they've gone through a lot. And now you're sitting here waiting and waiting and waiting. And as I said earlier, some people are okay with not being well. Some people have adjusted to their life being what it is, and they simply don't want to change. So it's really important to ask yourself, is hope playing a huge role in driving my decision making around this particular scenario? And is logic trying to tell me to wake up? Another issue I see is trauma bonding. In relationships with cycles of harm and reconciliation, trauma bonding happens. The intensity of the pain, followed by moments of repair, creates a powerful attachment. You start to feel bonded to this person, not because the relationship is healthy, but because you've survived so much together. And trauma bonds make it incredibly hard to leave or accept that change won't happen, because walking away feels like abandoning someone you've been through so much with, even if they're the one causing the cycle of harm. Another common one I see is actually called the sunk cost fallacy. You've invested so much. You've invested years, energy, emotional labor. You've sacrificed other relationships, opportunities, even parts of yourself to make this relationship work. And walking away feels like admitting all of that was for nothing. So you keep trying because stopping feels like wasting everything you've already given. But this is something you need to understand. Continuing to invest in something that's harming you doesn't make the previous investment worthwhile. It just means you're losing more over time. And so I want you to just pay attention to the ways that you might say, if I walk away, then I am also walking away from years of investing in this relationship, whether it be with a friend or even whether it be with a romantic partner. But sitting around waiting also is costing you. It might be costing you your mental health. It might also be costing your physical health, because I see time and time again the way stress literally wreaks havoc on the body, and people start to develop chronic illnesses and all of these other issues pertaining to their health because they are in deeply dysfunctional relationships. So I want you to pay attention to that. Now, this next one is very common in romantic relationships, and it's related to the sunk cost fallacy, but it's a little more specific. And it's this perception that if I leave now, after all the work I've put in trying to get my partner to change, what if they finally do change before the next person? And I see this a lot in my work when I work with women. I've put in trying to get him to change so much, and I don't want the next woman to benefit from the version of him I've been waiting for. So you've had all the hard conversations. You've done the emotional labor. As I said earlier, you found yourself a therapist. You found him a therapist. You are the one who encouraged couple therapy. You've endured the hurt while trying to help him grow. And the thought of walking away and watching him give someone else the improved version you feel you worked for feels unbearable. So you stay. Not because the relationship is good, but because leaving feels like handing the prize to someone who didn't do any of the work. And so you start to feel jealous of a woman who doesn't even exist yet. But here is what this fear misses. If you are in a relationship with somebody and he changes for the next woman, it's not because of the work you did. It is simply because he decided to change. And if he was capable of deciding to change, most of the time he would choose to do it in the moment while he is with you. So the fact that he didn't may give you a lot of information. If you are asking for the same thing over and over and over again, as I said earlier, it's possible this person just doesn't want to be that version for you, but they might want to be that version for the next person. And I think this is where we struggle around people's agency and autonomy because we think we're doing all this work. Yeah, we might be fighting for them to change and helping them recognize parts of themselves. But if they continue to be who they are in the relationship, we also have to ask ourselves, if this is the version of them that I'm getting, and I fear that they will be a better version of themselves for the next person, it's also worth asking yourself, why? What happened that made this person decide all of a sudden they want to change for this person? You may never know the why. So understand that you're not your partner's rehabilitation project. And staying to make sure the next woman doesn't benefit from your labor just means you're continuing to harm yourself to avoid someone else potentially having what you couldn't get. And so I really think it's important to do the work of dismantling this idea that we have to stay in suffering or that there's more that we can do in our relationships when somebody is just simply deciding that they don't want to do it. The next thing is that fear of giving up means you failed. We've been taught that good people don't give up on relationships, that if you really care, you keep trying. That walking away means you didn't try hard enough, you didn't love them enough, you didn't have enough patience or grace. But giving up on a relationship that's harming you is not a failure. It is self-preservation, and it's also protecting your mental health and physical health. And accepting that someone won't change isn't giving up on them, it's accepting reality. The next thing is the belief that love should be enough. This is so common. We think that if I just love them enough, they'll change. If I'm just patient enough or supportive enough or even understanding enough, they'll finally do better. But love doesn't fix people who don't want to be fixed. Love doesn't change people who don't want to change. Love can coexist with acceptance that the person you love is incapable of or willing to meet you in a healthy relationship. So, how does someone go from how do I fix this to can I make peace with this? Because at some point, the question has to change. You have to stop asking, what else can I do to make them change? And start asking yourself, can I actually make peace with this relationship being what it is? And that is a very painful place to be in. But it is going to be a very freeing and healing place to exist in as well. Because it means letting go of the relationship you wanted and accepting the one that you actually have. And are you going to grieve? Yes, absolutely. Especially, like I said, if this is pertaining to family, you are absolutely going to grieve. But there is also a difference between grieving and suffering. And when you keep trying to make someone be who they don't want to be, that is how you stay in a cycle of self-suffering, of self-sabotage. But when you get to a place of recognizing this is who this person is, and I have to ask myself, can I make peace with that? And by making peace with that, I also have to figure out how to manage this relationship. Though it might be painful, though it might come up with grief, it also is very freeing and it can be very cathartic. And so you have to, one, own and understand that not everyone wants to heal, because this is one of the hardest things that people struggle to acknowledge. Some people are content staying exactly as they are, even if their behavior harms other people. Some people aren't interested in self-reflection, growth, or change. And you can't want healing for someone more than they want it for themselves. You also can't force someone to do the internal work required to show up differently in relationships. You can't care someone into changing. The next thing that you have to understand is that the person that you're dealing with might just want you to accommodate their behavior because they don't want to change. They want you to change your response to their behavior. They want you to stop being upset when they disrespect you. They want you to stop bringing up the pattern. They want you to lower your standards so that they don't have to rise to meet them. So they're not asking, how can I do better? They're asking, how can you accept this? And that's honestly a question you really have to own. How can you accept this? And accepting this might mean better boundaries. It might mean more distance. It might mean many things, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean continuing to accommodate harmful behavior. The next thing is you have to engage a mindset shift. Once you see this clearly, that they don't want to change, that they want you to accommodate their poor behavior, the question shifts. It's no longer about fixing them. It's about whether you can accept this reality and decide what comes next. So, as I've said, can you make peace with this person being who they are? Can you accept this relationship for what it actually is instead of what you hoped it would be? And if you can't, what does that mean? That's the shift from trying to change them to accepting reality and deciding what you're willing to live with. Now, I'm going to pause here and just say that if this episode is resonating with you, I would love for you to hit that subscribe button. And when you're done listening, please remember to rate the show and leave a review, because your ratings and your comments help the show grow tremendously. So now I want to take a moment to give you some strategies on what to do when people won't change. Instead of constantly saying, what can I do? Here are some things that you actually can do that has nothing to necessarily do with trying to change the other person. It's all about helping you move forward with reality. So the first thing you need to do is stop asking, what else can I do? And start asking, what am I willing to accept? The question isn't what else can you do to fix them, especially when you know you've done enough. The question is, can I accept this relationship as it is? That's a real question you have to ask yourself. So if I know I'm in a relationship with someone and I feel like my partner doesn't meet a particular need, can I be okay moving forward in this relationship knowing that this is a need my partner is not willing to fulfill? Can I accept that my mother is a really cold, callous person and I can't call her to celebrate life milestones, but maybe I can talk to her about other things? The reason why this is important is because it helps you to assess where you stand in this relationship and what it looks like moving forward. This shifts the focus from trying to change them to deciding what you're willing to live with. The next thing that I encourage you to do is to actually acknowledge the pattern that's happening. Sometimes you might even have to say it out loud or write it down. But sometimes you have to say, this person has shown me repeatedly that they won't change. This person has shown me repeatedly that they're not going to meet this need. I've asked, I've explained, I've waited, and the behavior continues. This allows you to wake up from the sleep that you're in. Because sometimes we get so focused on fixing a behavior, we don't realize that we're living in a state of in denial. We're refusing to acknowledge what's actually happening right in front of us. And so sometimes you actually have to name it out loud or write it down to recognize it's been 10 years of this thing. Maybe I need to open my eyes to see what's been happening right in front of me this whole time. The next thing is you have to decide what you can and can't tolerate. You have to get clear on what you're willing to accept and what you feel crosses a line. So can you stay in this relationship knowing it will always have this particular limitation? Can you continue the connection while protecting yourself from ongoing harm? Or is the harm too great to stay? There really is no right answer, but you do need to have clarity on your own boundaries. You have to be willing to sit with yourself to say, in order to move forward, this is what I need. If this person cannot meet this need, these are the things that I am going to do to protect myself from the frustration and the harm. The next thing is I would really encourage you to take a pause and stop trying to convince them to change, because you've said what needs to be said. You've already told your mom over and over again how she makes you feel. You've explained how their behavior affects you. You've given your sibling numerous opportunities to do better. What would it look like for you to stop repeating yourself and stop hoping that the next conversation will be the one that finally lands, and instead tap into your own agency to say, this is what I'm going to start doing for myself. This kind of goes back to understanding what you will and will not tolerate. because you're recognizing that I'm spending all of my labor on convincing them to be different. That is taking away from my ability to look inwardly and say, well, how can I respond to this? By stopping the need to convince them to be different, I can now reframe that to looking internally to say, what do I need to do to change? Maybe I need to stop going to them for this problem. Maybe I also need to stop expecting them to handle this situation with maturity. They've never been mature. Why will they start being mature now? So the reason why this is important is because we don't realize that by trying to get other people to change, it's emotionally exhausting and it's very mentally taxing. So learn to reframe that to what are the things you can be doing to change. As I said earlier, you are going to have to grieve what won't be. Making peace with a relationship that won't change requires grief. You have to grieve the relationship you thought you'd have, the partnership you hoped for, the friend you thought they'd be, the family member you needed them to become. You have to grieve the version of them you keep waiting for, the one who will finally hear you, finally change, finally show up the way you need. Because unfortunately, that version doesn't exist. And if it does, they're not willing to become that person. So let yourself feel the loss. Cry if you need to, be angry if you need to, mourn the relationship you wanted, mourn the person you thought they'd become. Also, mourn the future you imagined with them. That won't happen. Grief is how you process loss. And understand that this is a loss, even if the relationship technically continues. You might have to come to terms with this is how your sister is always going to be until she decides to change. And that might make you really sad because you were hoping to have a sister who's almost like a best friend. It can be really hard to know that your mother is severely emotionally unsafe to be around. And you might have to ask yourself, how can I be around her while also mourning that this is just a side of her I'll never see? Your father may also be the same way. Understand that it's about mourning something you never actually had but desperately wanted. And that is a natural part of life. I also want you to lean into radical acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean you think the relationship is okay as it is. It doesn't mean you're condoning the behavior, and it doesn't mean you've stopped wanting better. It just means that you have finally opened your eyes and you're seeing the relationship clearly. You're accepting that this is who they are, and this is what they're willing to give, and this is what the relationship will be unless they decide to change, which they've shown you up until now that they won't. From that place of acceptance, you can look inward at your own agency and autonomy to make a real decision about what comes next. It also helps you to see, I am not powerless. By accepting this, it also helps me to understand what I can do to move forward. Now, I also want to add this layer. You need to accept that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, because sometimes the concept of what else can I do pertains to relationships where we're trying to rescue, fix, or save people. You can't love someone into healing. You can't cure someone into changing. And you, most importantly, can't want their growth more than they do. There are people that we love and we see them suffering, but you also have to ask yourself, is some of this suffering self-imposed? And if they're not willing to make different choices that would alleviate some of that suffering, there really isn't much that you can do. And accepting this doesn't mean you don't care about the person. It means you're releasing yourself from the impossible task of fixing someone who doesn't want to be fixed, at least for right now, who doesn't want to change, at least for right now, who doesn't want to heal, at least for right now. They're going to have to want it when they want it, and there's nothing you can do to change that. Once you've accepted they won't change, you can decide, can I stay in this relationship with clear boundaries and lowered expectations? Or can I maintain a surface level connection while protecting my heart? Or you might even have to ask yourself, do I need to step away entirely? All of these thoughts are valid. And the question is, what can you sustain without harming yourself? The last thing I want to share is it's really important to build support outside of this particular relationship. Don't make this relationship that you are struggling in your only source of connection, validation, or support. Build other relationships, invest in friendships, create community elsewhere so that when this relationship doesn't meet your needs, you have other places to turn. You recognize it's not meeting your needs right now. And as a result of that, you might have to say, well, I don't want to throw out the whole entire relationship because they can't do X for me, but maybe I need better friendships. Maybe I need hired help, like a therapist or a coach or someone else who can just help fulfill that particular need that the person I love simply can't. So here's what I want you to take from this episode. You have done enough. You've had the conversations, you set the boundary, explained the hurt, you've given chances. You have done enough. It's really important to get to a place where you recognize, I have done enough. And the question now isn't what else can you do? It's whether you can make peace with the relationship being what it is instead of what you wish it could be. As I said, not everyone wants to heal. Not everyone wants to change. Some people want you to accommodate their behavior, not address it. And you have to decide whether you're willing to keep accommodating whatever it is you're accommodating, or whether it's time to grieve what won't be and accept it. Accepting that someone won't change isn't giving up. It's just opening your eyes to see what's happening clearly. And from that clarity, you can make real decisions about what comes next. So if this episode resonated with you, please rate and subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on Spotify, I would love for you to leave a comment. I read them all the time, and I'd love to hear your feedback on today's episode. Also, please subscribe to my newsletter, All the Hard Things, on Substack, and grab a copy of my book, Owning Our Struggles. You can find the links to those things in the description box. And here's one more takeaway before you leave. The question isn't, what else can you do to change someone? Remember that most of the time we're trying to figure out how can we make peace with the relationships that we're in. And if we can't, we have options. We are not powerless people. You have the power to change what you don't like. Until next time.